So for more on this topic, Anil Gupta, a professor at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. Of course, Saruhan is with us again. Good to see both of you.
Good to see you.
Professor, let me start with you. This issue of the yuan, the U.S. saying it's too low, it's got to appreciate more. I have noticed personally less rhetoric, less talk, at least here in Washington, D.C., about that.
Correct.
And of course, you heard me talk about the IMF
Exactly.
and Brent Bernanke's comments. So my question is, have we reached a point where both sides are moderately happy?
I think, in terms of the value of any currency, there is no absolutely correct value. So it's all relative. And so it really comes down to relative to what? So, until early 2014, basically the yuan's appreciation was roughly going in line with the US dollar and euro and other currencies. And so therefore the US government and IMF had pretty much the same view. But since early 94 to now, the yuan has appreciated by 24% against the euro, but pretty much remained level with the US dollar. And compared to the IMF SDR, the yuan has appreciated by about 10, 12%. And so essentially, from the US perspective, the yuan needs to appreciate more. But from the IMF perspective, from Europe's perspective, yuan is already fairly valued.
But here's the thing, without getting overly political, if we're all a bunch of countries, every country is going to want to have a relatively lower currency because it makes your exports more attractive. Some people use quantitative easing, some people use, there's a variety of methods you can do to keep your currencies relatively undervalued, if that's even the right word. What's wrong with that?
Actually, it's not necessarily.
Some would argue everyone's doing it.
That's right, but it's not necessarily clear that a weaker currency is always good, because obviously a weaker currency makes exports more competitive, but it makes imports more expensive. And also, if you look at China's drive to go global and to make Chinese investments abroad, it makes foreign acquisitions more expensive.
Yeah, and Saruhan, we've talked about this before. Of course, we just talked about exports, but are we overplaying the currency issue when we talk about exports? Because we put so much emphasis on how the foreign currency impacts the exports, which ultimately impacts the economy. Are we oversimplifying this?
I think we're a little bit, but I'll make a comment on Dr. Gupta's point. He's absolutely right. We haven't seen Argentina flush with cash. Venezuela, Ukraine, all these currencies are depreciated by 50, 60%, but the economy is not working. On the other point, well, China is slowing down, right? We agree on that. There's also capital outflows from China. So that is going to have an impact on the currency. It's normal that Chinese currency is going to depreciate, and I think the United States knows that. But there's also a lot of liberalization taking place in China. Interest rates will be liberalized. The liquidity deposits will be able to open up and will be able to buy foreign assets, including US dollars. All of these things will put pressure on the currency in the short term, and the currency is going to depreciate. So we're making too much of it.
Bottom line is there are a lot of factors. These trade deals, we've talked about this before, between the TPP,
right.
Even the AIIB, which is of course the new infrastructure bank, and also all these projects that China has, all these deals. Is there an impact? Can we say there's an impact to the currency, or it's too awkward to say that?
No, I think, because the TPP is, of course, it's not yet been approved. And even after it gets approved, it takes time to have an impact on the currency. The AIIB has just been set up. So I think it's way too early to say that either the AIIB...
But in the long run, if they all came to fruition, all these things all worked out as they all hope.
No, even in the long run, it's very difficult to predict. I think we can definitely say that all of these trade deals, because they reduce friction, they are good for the global economy. But will they have an impact on the yuan or the dollar or the yen? That's very hard to say, because ultimately it's all relative. So why should it have an impact on one currency but not the counterpart other currency?
I want to get both of your thoughts on this, because it's something that we've talked about on and off for the last decade. And that's the point of manufacturers in China used to have a huge advantage, right? Cheap labor, cheap currency, everything was just the perfect scenario. Of late, it hasn't been the case. There has been wage inflation. And of course, with the rise of the currency, that makes things a little less competitive. And don't forget, there's a lot of very competitive neighbors China has as
Yes.
well. So my question to you is China, from a currency standpoint, how is its competitiveness compared to its neighbors? India,
Right.
Vietnam, Malaysia.
I think, I mean, from an export point of view, obviously the direct comparison in the neighborhood will be with Japan and South Korea. And if you look at over the last 5 years, actually the Chinese yuan and the Korean won have pretty much stayed at parity. I mean, there have been fluctuations in between, but they've roughly stayed at parity. But the yuan compared to the Japanese yen has appreciated over the last 5 years by about 40+%. And so which means that Japanese exports are more competitive vis-a-vis Chinese exports today as compared to 5 years back. Now, how does that matter? Because one of the big exports from China, for example, is high-speed trains. And that's also an area of competitive advantage for Japan. And so in exports to India, in exports to Latin America, it gives Japan a competitive advantage.
So, Saruhan, very quickly, any beneficiaries from this whole complicated discussion on currencies in terms of the Chinese yuan having appreciated so much?
Well, any beneficiaries, the neighboring companies, regional, like Vietnam, Bangladesh, because we are talking to clients and they're giving us information that with the increased cost pressures on the manufacturers, a lot of them are actually moving operations to these countries. I think Indonesia, India will be there as well. So eventually, there's this concern about in Washington that the trade deficit with China is huge. Our trade deficit is huge. They say, but all of these exports are going to, or being manufactured in different countries, they will still come back to the United States and put pressure on the trade deficit.
The law of economics still matters. It's still about being competitive. Professor Gupta, always good to see you. Saruhan, I'm going to see you after the break. Thank you.
Good to see you.